purpose, to fight. And when that fighting was done, they had no more utility. And so it was because of people like Ed Maloney, Steve Hinton, and so on that they survived, and that in some cases they still fly. Very honored to have this aircraft here to talk about today. And you're going to see that this aircraft is here really because of nothing more than sheer serendipitous luck. It could have easily gone the other direction for it at several occasions in its life. And so let's talk about this. Is the only surviving authentic Japanese Zero in existence. And we'll soon see that its story is one of sheer luck. The museum's Zero is an A6M5 variant. Its official military designation is A6M5 Type 0, Model 52 carrier-borne fighter. The A refers to the class of aircraft, in this case, carrier-based fighter. It was the sixth carrier-designed fighter from Mitsubishi, the developer and prime contractor. And it was the fifth model or variant of the type, thus the A6M5. Nearly 11,000 Zeros of all variants were built from 1940 until 1945. Most of these, 6,215 to be exact, were licensed built by the Nakajima Aircraft Factory. Nakajima operated 5 manufacturing factories during the war years. The museum's serial number 5357 rolled off the assembly line at the Kozumi plant, which is located there, located in the tiny factory town of Oizumi in the Gunma Prefecture. So that's the Gunma Prefecture, and that's where Oizumi. The prefecture is located to the north and west of the Japanese capital of Tokyo. Oizumi is located just 60 miles from Tokyo. Serial number 5357 tells us that this aircraft was the 357th A6M5 to be built by Nakajima. The aircraft was completed and delivered to the Imperial Japanese Navy's first air fleet in May of 1943. Now, less than 2 years after this date, American bombs would seriously damage the Nakajima facility at Oizumi during B-29 attacks. So that's the first little bullet it dodged. But in the summer of 1943, due to damage and losses of Japanese carriers in battles such as Coral Sea, Midway, and the Guadalcanal campaign, the Imperial Japanese First Air Fleet had been converted to from a sea-based unit to a land-based unit. Now, islands and airfields would serve the role of unsinkable aircraft carriers. As such, aircraft A6M5 and 357 would never seek carrier duty. It was instead assigned to the newly formed 261st Kokutai, which is what they call their air groups, and that was a land-based unit. It was given the tail number 61-120. By the fall of 1943, the 261st Kokutai was in operation to provide an air defensive cover on the southernmost home island of Japan, Kyushu. The air group operated out of Nagasaki, and more than likely, aircraft 61-120 would have flown patrols from Tsushima Island in the Korea Strait to the East China Sea. Of utmost concern was the protection of the many shipbuilding, steel, munitions, and other war-related factories found in Nagasaki. And the lightning strip was in Nagasaki as well. Now, in less than 2 years, many of these areas would be destroyed or seriously damaged when the United States dropped Fat Man in August 1945 on Nagasaki. But aircraft 61-120 would not be in Nagasaki in 1945. In October 1943, the squadron was transferred to the island of Iwo Jima, a small, desolate speck of land in the Volcano Island chain. Iwo Jima is located just 800 miles from Japan. It is a key strategic defense point to protect the islands from attack. At Iwo, aircraft 61-120 would operate from an airfield called Motoyama No. 1. Right there. Once again, its primary mission was to fly protective cover patrols This time, it is guarding the hundreds of soldiers, sailors, and conscripted laborers who were busy fortifying the island into a Japanese stronghold. In March of 1944, the squadron is once again moved. Perhaps as it departed Iwo Jima, aircraft 61-120 flew over the dozens of Japanese transport ships now making their way to the island. These ships were bringing 21,000 Japanese soldiers to Iwo Jima to defend the island against a possible invasion of American forces. That attack would come exactly 12 months later, when the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps detachments engaged the Japanese in a 5-week battle. The Iwo Jima fight would involve some of the fiercest and bloodiest combat of the Pacific War. Only 216 Japanese soldiers from that original 21,000 contingent would remain alive by the end of the battle. In March of 44, though, aircraft 61-120 was landing on yet another island. Just 500 miles to the south of Iwo Jima lay the Marianas Islands of Saipan, Tinian, Rota, and Guam. These islands mark the outer perimeter of the Japanese home island defense network. Saipan had been under Japanese control since before the First World War. Beginning in 1939, the tiny 85 square mile island was fortified with a strong Japanese military presence. By May of 1944, there are just over 30,000 Japanese troops and nearly 34,000 civilians living on Saipan. Aircraft 61-120 is based at Aslito Airfield in the southern portion of the island. It is one of 150 aircraft based on the island. Beginning in April, daily patrol flights are flown from the 4,500-foot runway at Aslito. In June 1944, the Japanese garrison on Saipan was caught unawares as the U.S. Navy began a naval and aerial bombardment of the island. Over the next 2 days, American ships, bombers, and fighter aircraft pummeled Saipan. 36 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in the air or on the ground. Aircraft 61-120 was spared in these attacks and most likely rose to meet the enemy fighters in combat, although no actual record of the aircraft's engagements exists. The aircraft did, however, acquire some battle scarring. American troops landed on Saipan on June 15th. Fierce fighting ensued. The next day, a contingent of Marines and the U.S. Army began a push to the south of the island. With the Army's 27th Infantry Division bearing down on Aslito Airfield, the Japanese began destroying the aircraft based there. On June 18th, when the airfield was overrun and captured, only a handful of Japanese planes remained. Among the survivors was aircraft 61-120. This is a photograph of it on Saipan at Aslito. Japanese counterattacks and suicide banzai attacks centered around reclaiming the airfield that American troops held. Fighting on Saipan would continue for another month. By July 9th, the battle for Saipan was over, and the island was secure. Over 3,000 U.S. troops had died and another 13,000 wounded. An estimated 30,000 Japanese troops died. Only 952 Japanese were captured. Tragically, it's believed that nearly 22,000 civilians died, many committing suicide out of fear of capture. On July 12, 1944, aircraft 61-120 was loaded onto the USS Kopahi, a boat-class escort carrier. It was one of 13 Zeros and one Nakajima B-5 Enkei aircraft and equipment removed from Saipan. They were brought to the United States for intelligence purposes. The Kopahi made port in San Diego on July 28, 1944. There, members of the Technical Air Intelligence Unit evaluated the captured aircraft. 4 of these aircraft, including 61-120, were deemed airworthy. 2 were turned over to the U.S. Army Air Force. The other 2 were transferred to the U.S. Navy. Aircraft 61-120 went to the Navy. The aircraft were painted over with American markings. In August, aircraft 61-120 was flown cross-country to the Naval Air Station Patuxent River in Maryland. In Washington, plans were being finalized for the invasion of the Japanese home islands. Every technological and military edge was being sought. Perhaps aircraft 61-120 could yield additional information that would prove helpful to invading American troops. From September to November 1944, the aircraft was flown regularly over the Pax River Air Station. Test pilots from the military and industry were invited to fly the aircraft. Representatives who flew the aircraft were those from Douglas Aircraft, Ryan Aeronautical, Chance Vought, Republic Aviation, Bell Aircraft, Northrop Aviation, Grumman, and Goodyear, as well as several pilots from the U.S. Navy, the Royal Navy, and the U.S. Army Air Force. But perhaps the most notable pilot to fly this aircraft during this time was the representative from United Aircraft Corporation, a gentleman by the name of Charles. And that's again, that is our aircraft there. When the test flights were completed in December, the aircraft was flown back to San Diego. It was assigned to the Combat Air Service Unit Number 5, or CASU Number 5, based on North Island, San Diego. CASU 5 was also prepping for the invasion of Japan, and it was felt that familiarity with the Zero would prove beneficial to their operations. It would remain with CASU 5 until the war's end in September 1945. The end of the Pacific War brought an end to Aircraft 61-120's usefulness with the military. In late September, it was ferried to Alameda, California. Plans called for the aircraft to be used as a Cape Guardian for a U.S. military installation. This would mean mounting it on a pole, probably forever doomed to be pursued by a similar pole-mounted naval aircraft. But the idea was scrapped, probably because somebody said, "Why do we have a Japanese aircraft on front of our?" And shortly thereafter, it was declared surplus equipment and soon disappeared off the Navy register. In 1950, Ed Maloney located the aircraft rusting away in a California scrapyard. He negotiated and was able to acquire it. Ed envisioned the aircraft 61-120 as a key artifact that needed to be saved, preserved, and displayed. When the museum opened in January 1957, the aircraft was on display on opening day. It would travel with the museum over the years from Claremont, the original location, to Ontario, down to Buena Park, and ultimately, eventually here to Chino. In 1974, the museum took the bold step to restore the aircraft to flight. Technical drawings and manuals were acquired and translated from Japanese into English. Skilled mechanics were put to work replacing the metal wing spars, overhauling the engine, rewiring the electrical system, and replacing the seals on the hydraulic system. It would be an expensive and time-consuming undertaking. Even the original A6M developer, Hirokoshi, was consulted. 5 years later, on June 28, 1978, nearly 33 years after the aircraft's last flight, aircraft 61-120 flew again. And here's a short film with Ed narrating that shows the aircraft's first flight after restoration.
This particular material was captured on the site in June 1944. Approximately 5 years of work went into the rebuilding of this airplane. Here at Maloney is viewing the engine detail of the 14-cylinder Sakai engine as Mr. Awaki from Japan is doing some final preparation on the engine. Rich Palmer also working on the aircraft engine. Steve Hinton doing some last minute instrument installations. Don Likens and Tom Cassidy talk over about the flight test. Here's showing Don Likens climbing aboard the aircraft. There the Nakajima 14-cylinder Sakai engine is being run. Your Japanese Zero fighter has a different sound than most American engines. This is a well-proven, very reliable engine. Being used in over 10,000 liters of aircraft. Here the aircraft is being shown taxiing out to test its landing gear by pilot Don Likens. Here the aircraft is showing in its First takeoff at Chino Airport. Donnie gives it the gun, the tail lifts very rapidly, and in a short run of under 1,000 feet, the airplane is over. This first flight took place on June 28, 1978, approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. The chase is being done by Jim Maloney in the museum's North American P-51D Mustang.
Aircraft 61-120 would fly almost continuously for the next 36 years. During that time, it would revisit Japan several times and has the distinction of being the first Japanese Zero to fly over Japan since the end of the Second World War. It has been featured in several movies and television shows, most notably The Winds of War and the 2001 film Pearl Harbor. It has participated in countless air shows, and it has been featured as a scale model kit. Millions have seen the Zero fly. 2014, following its third goodwill tour of Japan, Planes of Fame Air Museum made the decision to re-restore the aircraft. That restoration took 2 years. Today, the aircraft is restored to its original paint scheme, the same that it featured when it arrived at the 261st Kokutai. Planes of Fame Air Museum A6M50 has led a charmed existence. Luck and timing have played a huge part in her survival, as has the caretaking of the dedicated employees and volunteers. There are about a handful of flying A6M0s left in the world today. The museum's aircraft is the most authentic example of them all, preserved and flying so that current and future generations can enjoy and appreciate it for the years to come. She has flown more hours here in the United States than she ever did while flying in the service of Japan. For that reason, and the fact that we can all experience and enjoy her today, she truly is America's Zero. So thank you very much for allowing me to present to you today. Now I'm going to turn the mic over to Kevin. But before I do, I want to acknowledge Kevin. So we're at the end of another year, and the Living History events would not really be much of anything if it wasn't for Kevin Thompson.